You've probably heard about how the brain controls your thoughts, emotions, and memories. But what if I told you that beneath all that lies a chilling reality? A side of neuroscience so disturbing, most experts avoid even talking about it. You clicked this video for a reason. So before we dive into this terrifying iceberg, I've got one quick question for you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Are you in bed at 3 a.m., about to ruin your sleep, or watching this on break, pretending you're fine? Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Now, let's begin. 1. The brain only uses 10%. You've probably heard it before. That classic line, humans only use 10% of their brains. It sounds profound, mysterious, even a little exciting. After all, if 90% of your brain is just sitting there unused, imagine the possibilities, right? Well, here's the truth. It's completely false. The idea likely began as a misinterpretation of neurological studies in the early 1900s. Some researchers noticed that only a portion of the brain seemed to light up during certain tasks, leading people to believe the rest was inactive or unused. But this couldn't be further from reality. Modern neuroscience, through advanced imaging tools like fMRI and PET scans, has shown that almost every region of the brain is active, even during rest. Whether you're sleeping, scrolling, stressing, or simply sitting still, your brain is constantly working behind the scenes. From regulating your breathing and heart rate to processing subconscious thoughts, background emotions, and sensory input, there's no such thing as a silent or unused part of the brain. So why does this myth stick around? Well, it's catchy. It taps into a powerful idea that we all have untapped potential just waiting to be unlocked. And to be fair, there's some truth to that. Not because 90% of your brain is dormant, but because we often underuse our capacity for creativity, emotional intelligence, or focused learning. But let's be clear, your brain is not a storage unit with 90% of it collecting dust. It's more like a symphony. Every part has a role to play, even if it's not playing loud all the time. Believing the 10% myth can actually be harmful. It opens the door for pseudoscience, fake, brain-unlocking products, and miracle cures that promise cognitive superpowers, with no real scientific backing. So the next time someone tells you that you only use 10% of your brain, you can confidently say, "Nope, I'm using way more, even when I don't realize it." And that's a fact your neurons will definitely appreciate. 2. Left brain versus right brain. At some point, you've probably been told you're either a left-brained logical thinker or a right-brained creative dreamer. It's a fun way to label personalities. The left brain folks, they're supposed to love math, organization, and structure. The right-brained, they're your artists, musicians, and free spirits. But here's the twist. This theory is mostly a myth. Yes, it's true that certain brain functions are more dominant in one hemisphere. For example, language processing is usually handled by the left side of the brain, especially in right-handed people, while spatial awareness and facial recognition tend to lean more on the right. But the idea that people are either left-brained or right-brained, and that this defines their personality or intelligence, is a massive oversimplification. In reality, your brain is far more integrated. The two hemispheres are connected by a thick bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum, allowing them to communicate constantly. Most cognitive tasks, from solving problems to enjoying music, require both sides of the brain working together. Let's use creativity as an example. While right brain regions might help you visualize and imagine, your left brain plays a crucial role in organizing thoughts, applying rules, and even verbalizing your ideas. So even writing a poem or composing a song involves both hemispheres in harmony. So, where did the myth come from? It stems from misinterpretations of early brain studies, particularly split brain experiments done in the 1960s. These studies revealed how each hemisphere processes information, but popular media took the findings and turned them into simplified personality types. And while it may seem harmless, the left versus right brain myth can actually limit people. Students may avoid creative fields because they think they're too logical. Others might steer clear of science or math because they're too imaginative. When in reality, we all use both sides, and both sides are necessary for balance, growth, and success. So the next time someone says they're not good at art because they're left-brained, or bad at math because they're right-brained, remind them, your brain doesn't pick sides. You're not left-brained or right-brained, you're whole-brained. And that's where real power lies. 3. Brain games improve intelligence. In recent years, brain training games have exploded in popularity. You've probably seen the ads. A quick puzzle or memory test that promises to boost your IQ, sharpen your mind, and keep your brain young. Sounds great, right? After all, who wouldn't want to become smarter by playing fun little games? But here's the truth. While brain games can improve your performance on specific tasks, they don't actually make you smarter overall. Let's break that down. When you play a memory game repeatedly, your brain becomes better at that specific game, just like your body adapts to a repeated workout. But studies show that these improvements don't transfer to other areas of thinking, like problem solving, creativity, or general reasoning. In other words, if you train your brain to get better at remembering a sequence of numbers, you'll improve at that game. But you won't suddenly ace math tests or become a master strategist. One of the most high-profile examples comes from a company called Lumosity. For years, they marketed their brain games as tools to improve intelligence, prevent cognitive decline, and even reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. But in 2016, the Federal Trade Commission fined them millions for deceptive advertising. Why? Because the scientific evidence just didn't support the big claims. Now, that doesn't mean all brain games are useless. In moderation, they can be fun and stimulating, especially for older adults looking to stay mentally active. But if your goal is true mental growth, you're better off doing things that challenge multiple parts of your brain. Things like learning a new language, picking up a musical instrument, reading challenging books, or engaging in thoughtful conversation. These activities require memory, emotion, focus, and abstract thinking, giving your brain a more well-rounded workout. Also, physical exercise, sleep, and a balanced diet play a huge role in brain health, often more than any app or game. So the next time you see a game claiming to unlock your brain's full potential, remember, real intelligence isn't built by swiping tiles or matching patterns. It's built through curiosity, effort, and real-world challenges that stretch your thinking, not just your thumbs. 4. Neuroplasticity. The human brain is often compared to a machine, but that doesn't quite do it justice. Unlike most machines, the brain isn't static. It adapts, evolves, and rewires itself throughout your life. This remarkable ability is called neuroplasticity. In simple terms, neuroplasticity means your brain has the power to change, based on your experiences, environment, behavior, and even your thoughts. It's what allows stroke patients to regain motor skills, or someone who's blind to use parts of their visual cortex for hearing or touch. Sounds amazing, right? It is. But here's what most people don't realize. Neuroplasticity doesn't just work in your favor, just like positive habits and learning can strengthen your brain. Negative experiences and patterns can rewire it in damaging ways too. Let's say someone is constantly exposed to chronic stress. Over time, the brain physically changes. The amygdala, the region responsible for fear and emotion, can grow more sensitive. Meanwhile, the hippocampus, which handles memory and learning, may actually shrink. That means someone under constant stress may become more anxious, forgetful, or emotionally reactive. Not because of who they are, but because their brain has literally been reshaped. The same applies to unhealthy habits. Addictions, negative self-talk, excessive screen time, or even toxic relationships can subtly and consistently reshape brain pathways, making it harder to break free the longer it goes on. But here's the empowering part. Because of neuroplasticity, change is always possible. With intention and consistent effort, you can train your brain to create better patterns. Meditation, learning new skills, therapy, mindfulness, and even something as simple as regular gratitude journaling. All of these can strengthen neural connections that support well-being, focus, and resilience. So while the concept of neuroplasticity is often marketed in overly positive terms, like you can rewire your brain for success, it's important to understand both sides of the coin. Your brain is always changing. The question is, are you the one shaping it, or are you letting the world do it for you? Either way, neuroplasticity is happening. The power to direct it is in your hands. 5. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. When people hear the term electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, they often picture scenes from old movies, patients strapped to a table, being shocked violently, eyes wide with fear. It's a dramatic image, but also misleading. Electroconvulsive therapy is a real medical procedure that's still used today. And believe it or not, for certain people, especially those with severe treatment-resistant depression, ECT can be life-changing in a positive way. So why does it have such a dark reputation? Because historically, ECT was used without proper safety, consent, or compassion. In the mid-20th century, patients were often shocked, without anesthesia, without muscle relaxants, and sometimes without choice. The goal wasn't always healing. Sometimes it was simply to make patients compliant or quiet. These early treatments could cause intense memory loss, confusion, broken bones from convulsions, and long-term trauma. In some cases, patients couldn't even remember basic facts about their lives after treatment. Over time, the process became safer. Modern ECT is done under full anesthesia, with muscle relaxants and careful monitoring. The electrical pulses are brief and targeted, meant to induce a controlled seizure, which, oddly enough, can reset certain brain circuits and provide relief from depression, mania, or catatonia. And for people who haven't responded to therapy or medication, it can offer a real chance at recovery. Still, it's not without side effects. Memory loss can still occur, particularly short-term memory around the time of treatment. And while some patients report feeling significantly better, others describe a feeling of emotional flatness or detachment afterward. So is ECT good or bad? The real answer is it's complicated. It's neither the torture device portrayed in horror films, nor is it a magical cure-all. It's a powerful tool, one that should be used with care, oversight, and only when truly necessary. The takeaway here is bigger than just ECT. In neuroscience, some of the most effective treatments come with real risks, especially when we're intervening directly in the brain. As our understanding of the brain deepens, so does our responsibility to use that knowledge wisely and to remember that every brain we try to fix belongs to a human being. 6. Memory is like a recording. We like to think of memory as a mental video camera, recording our lives moment by moment, ready to be replayed with perfect accuracy. But that's not how memory actually works. In reality, your memory is more like a puzzle, reconstructed each time you recall it. And just like any puzzle, pieces can be misplaced, altered, or even imagined entirely. Scientific research shows that every time you remember something, your brain isn't just retrieving a file, it's actively rebuilding the experience from scratch. Sounds, visuals, emotions, all pieced together using the clues you have. And that process is incredibly vulnerable to influence. For example, if someone suggests a detail, even unintentionally, your brain might fill it in as part of the memory. You may then remember it as something that really happened, even if it didn't. This is known as false memory formation, and it's more common than people think. One famous study by psychologist Elizabeth Loftus showed that people could be convinced they remembered seeing broken glass at the scene of a car crash, simply because the word smashed was used in the description. There was no broken glass, but the brain filled it in anyway. This has huge implications. It means eyewitness testimonies in court can be flawed, even when the person is 100% confident. It means siblings may remember childhood events differently, not because one is lying, but because memory itself is flexible. It also means our most treasured memories, those moments that shaped who we are, may not be as reliable as we'd like to believe. But before that sounds too unsettling, here's the good news. This reconstructive process also gives memory its beauty and resilience. It allows us to reinterpret pain, find meaning in events, and even heal from trauma by reshaping the way we remember it. So no, your brain isn't a perfect camera. It's more like a skilled artist, painting your life with every memory, each one shaped by your emotions, beliefs, and the stories you tell yourself. Understanding this doesn't make memory less special, it makes it more human. And that's something no hard drive could ever compete with. 7. The placebo effect. Imagine taking a sugar pill and feeling your pain go away. No active ingredient, no real medicine, just your belief that it works. That's the placebo effect, and it's one of the most fascinating and misunderstood phenomena in neuroscience and medicine. At its core, the placebo effect shows us that the brain can influence the body in powerful ways, sometimes mimicking the effects of actual drugs or treatments. When a person believes they're receiving help, even if it's just a harmless pill or a fake procedure, their brain often responds as if it's real. Heart rate changes, pain decreases, even symptoms of anxiety and depression can temporarily improve. But here's the surprising part. Placebos can cause real, measurable changes in the brain. Studies using brain scans have shown increased activity in areas related to pain relief, dopamine release, and mood regulation, all triggered by belief alone. This isn't just in your head, it's biology reacting to expectation. That said, the placebo effect is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it highlights the incredible power of mindset. It means hope, trust, and belief can genuinely improve health outcomes. That's why bedside manner, tone of voice, and patient confidence matter so much in healthcare. But on the flip side, the placebo effect can also blur the line between real medicine and pseudoscience. Many alternative treatments, like miracle supplements or energy bracelets, thrive on the placebo response. People might feel better, not because of the product, but because their brain expects improvement. And in some cases, that temporary relief delays real treatment for serious conditions. There's also something called the nocebo effect, the opposite of placebo. If you believe a harmless treatment will cause side effects, your brain might create those symptoms too. Headaches, fatigue, even nausea, all triggered by belief. So what's the takeaway? The placebo effect isn't just a quirk of psychology. It's a reminder that your brain isn't a passive observer. It's an active participant in your health. Belief alone won't cure everything, but it can influence how we experience illness, pain, and recovery. And sometimes the most powerful medicine is the one you believe is working. 8. The brain can heal itself. The human brain is one of the most resilient organs in the body. For decades, scientists believed that once brain cells were damaged, whether from injury, disease, or trauma, the loss was permanent. But today, we know something incredible. The brain can heal itself. This process is called neurogenesis, the formation of new neurons, and it happens in certain parts of the brain, even in adulthood. Combined with neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire and adapt, this means your brain is constantly evolving, learning, and even recovering from damage. Sounds like a superpower, right? And in many ways, it is. After a stroke, for example, the brain can reroute functions to different areas to compensate for what was lost. In people recovering from addiction, the brain can gradually rebuild healthier reward pathways. Even those healing from emotional trauma can see physical changes in the brain over time, through therapy, mindfulness, and consistent positive action. But, and this is important, the brain's ability to heal isn't limitless. Chronic stress, substance abuse, poor sleep, and long-term exposure to trauma can weaken the brain's regenerative abilities. The earlier the damage starts, especially during childhood or adolescence, the more deeply it can shape a person's development. For example, high levels of stress hormones like cortisol can shrink the hippocampus, the area critical for memory and learning. Long-term depression can slow down neurogenesis, and repeated head injuries can accelerate cognitive decline later in life. So yes, the brain can heal, but only if we give it the conditions it needs to thrive. That means regular physical activity, which boosts blood flow, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a kind of brain fertilizer, quality sleep, mental challenges, healthy nutrition, and strong social connections. Therapy, meditation, creative expression, all of these can also play a major role in helping the brain repair emotional and psychological wounds. The takeaway? Your brain isn't fragile. It's adaptable, powerful, and designed to recover. But it also needs your care and consistency to do its best work. Healing is possible. Not always easy, not always quick, but always worth striving for. Because the more you take care of your brain, the more it takes care of you. 9. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. When it comes to modern mental health treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is often considered the gold standard. It's one of the most widely studied and practiced forms of therapy, and for good reason. CBT is based on a simple but powerful idea. Your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all connected. If you can identify and change unhelpful thought patterns, you can influence how you feel and behave in daily life. Let's say someone constantly thinks, "I'm a failure." That thought affects their mood, making them feel anxious or hopeless. It might even lead them to avoid opportunities or isolate themselves. CBT helps people challenge those thoughts, look at the evidence, and replace them with healthier, more realistic beliefs. Like, "I've had setbacks, but I'm learning and growing." Sounds great, right? And for many people it is. CBT has been shown to be effective for depression, anxiety, PTSD, insomnia, and more. It's practical, structured, and often produces results in a relatively short amount of time. But here's the catch. CBT isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. While it helps many, it doesn't work for everyone, and that's okay. Some people find it too rigid or intellectual. Others may feel like they're being told to think positive without fully addressing deeper emotional wounds or trauma. In fact, when used incorrectly or too aggressively, CBT can sometimes lead people to suppress valid emotions. For example, someone grieving a major loss may be encouraged to reframe their sadness too soon, before they've had time to fully process it. This can leave individuals feeling disconnected from their true feelings, or worse, like they're doing something wrong for simply feeling human. That's why more therapists today are blending CBT with other approaches, like mindfulness, somatic therapy, or emotion-focused methods, to better serve each person's unique needs. The takeaway? CBT is a valuable tool, not a magic fix. It works best when it's tailored to the individual, used with empathy, and supported by a strong therapeutic relationship. So if you're considering CBT or already using it, know this. It's not about controlling your thoughts. It's about learning to understand them and gently guiding them towards something healthier. 10. Lobotomies were once mainstream. It's hard to imagine today, but not long ago, doctors believed the best way to treat mental illness was to physically damage the brain, and not by accident, but on purpose. Enter the lobotomy, a procedure that involved severing connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex in hopes of calming patients with severe psychiatric conditions. It sounds extreme, and it was, but at one point it was widely accepted. In fact, it was even celebrated. In the 1930s, Portuguese neurologist Antonio Egas Moniz introduced the procedure and was later awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine for it. Inspired by this, American physician Walter Freeman popularized lobotomies in the United States, and here's where things took a darker turn. Freeman's version of the lobotomy was shockingly fast and crude. Known as the ice pick lobotomy, it involved inserting a thin rod, yes, like an ice pick, through the patient's eye socket and tapping it with a hammer to disrupt brain tissue. No operating room, no anesthesia, sometimes performed in clinics, offices, even at public demonstrations. The goal? To reduce anxiety, agitation, and aggression. And in many cases, patients did become calmer. But at what cost? Many came out of the procedure with slurred speech, flattened personalities, memory problems, or worse. Some lost the ability to care for themselves. Others became emotionally numb, a shadow of who they once were. The damage was irreversible. Even more disturbing, thousands of lobotomies were performed on women, particularly housewives, many of whom were diagnosed with vague issues like nervousness or mood swings. Children and veterans were also subjected to the procedure. Eventually, as antipsychotic medications became available and public backlash grew, lobotomies fell out of favor. But the legacy they left behind is a stark reminder. Just because a treatment is accepted, even praised, doesn't mean it's ethical or effective. It also shows how limited our understanding of the brain once was, and why constant ethical oversight is critical in neuroscience. Today, we aim for healing, but history reminds us, when curiosity outruns compassion, progress can come at a devastating cost. 11. MK Ultra. It sounds like a science fiction thriller, a secret government program, mind control experiments, and unwitting participants. But this isn't a movie plot. This is real history. MK Ultra was a covert project run by the CIA during the Cold War era, beginning in the early 1950s. Its goal? To explore ways of controlling the human mind. Fueled by fears that foreign powers might develop psychological weapons, the CIA set out to test whether drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, or other psychological techniques could be used to manipulate behavior or even break down a person's identity. At the center of these experiments was a powerful, then poorly understood drug, LSD. Scientists and agents administered it to test subjects, sometimes with consent, but often without. People were dosed in universities, hospitals, and even prisons, with no idea they were part of a government experiment. The scope of MKUltra was vast. There were over 150 known subprojects across North America, testing everything from sleep deprivation to electroshock, isolation chambers to forced drug addiction. Some participants were patients seeking treatment, others were military personnel, and some were everyday citizens caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The ethical violations were staggering. There were no proper protocols, no oversight, and in some cases, no memory of what had happened, because erasing memories was part of the experiment too. Eventually, the project was exposed in the 1970s after a wave of investigative journalism and congressional hearings. But by then, much of the documentation had already been destroyed. To this day, we still don't know the full extent of what was done or who was affected. So what does MKUltra teach us? It's a chilling reminder that science without ethics can be dangerous. When fear drives decision-making and human beings are treated as test subjects instead of people, the consequences can last for generations. MKUltra isn't just a chapter in conspiracy lore, it's a real documented piece of history. And a reason why transparency, consent, and oversight are absolutely essential in any field that studies the human mind. The mind is powerful, and so is trust. When the two are abused, the results can be devastating. 12. Psychic driving. In the realm of experimental psychology, few practices sound as eerie or controversial as psychic driving. Developed in the 1950s by psychiatrist Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, this technique was designed to reprogram the human mind by erasing existing thoughts and replacing them with new ones. At first glance, it may seem like something out of a dystopian novel, but psychic driving was very real, and it was tested on actual patients. Cameron's theory was simple in concept, but disturbing in execution. He believed that by first wiping a person's memory clean and then subjecting them to repeated audio messages, he could overwrite destructive thought patterns with healthier ones. To achieve this, he used a process called depatterning. This involved high doses of sedatives, weeks of drug-induced sleep, and multiple daily sessions of electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, often far more intense than standard medical practice at the time. Patients were then placed in isolation and exposed to recorded messages played on a loop, sometimes for hours, even days at a time. The goal? To drive in new beliefs. But there were serious consequences. Many of the individuals treated at Cameron's clinic, often people with depression, anxiety, or postpartum symptoms, left with severe cognitive damage. Some lost the ability to speak, remember their families, or even function independently. And here's the chilling part. This work was funded in part by the CIA under the umbrella of MKUltra. The agency believed these techniques might be useful for interrogation or psychological warfare. But these weren't criminals or spies. They were ordinary people, many of whom never gave full consent or understood the true nature of what was happening to them. In time, Cameron's methods were discredited, and psychic driving was abandoned. But the damage had already been done, both to individuals and to the trust between science and society. So what does this teach us? That intentions are not enough in science. Even if the goal is healing, the means must always be ethical, transparent, and grounded in compassion. Because when human minds are treated like machines, and pain is ignored in the name of progress, the cost is never just theoretical. It's deeply personal. 13. Deep brain stimulation. Abuse. Modern medicine has come a long way, and few breakthroughs are as exciting or as mysterious as deep brain stimulation, often shortened to DBS. At its core, DBS involves implanting tiny electrodes into specific areas of the brain, which are then connected to a device, similar to a pacemaker, that sends controlled electrical pulses. Originally developed to treat movement disorders like Parkinson's disease, DBS has given thousands of patients a new lease on life, helping reduce tremors, stiffness, and other debilitating symptoms. Sounds like something out of science fiction, right? A device inside your brain that changes how you move and feel? Well, it gets even more interesting. Researchers soon discovered that DBS could also affect mood, behavior, and even personality. In clinical trials, it has shown promise in treating depression, OCD, chronic pain, and even addiction. In some cases, people reported feeling energized, happier, or more emotionally stable after stimulation. But here's where things get complicated and ethically murky. Because DBS affects deeper emotional and cognitive circuits, it doesn't just improve symptoms. It can also fundamentally alter who someone is. Some patients describe feeling like a different person. Others say their motivation changed. A few reported losing their sense of spontaneity, creativity, or emotional depth. And when a treatment starts to influence identity, personality, or free will, we need to ask serious questions. What happens if DBS is overused? What if someone feels pressured to undergo it for non-medical reasons, like improving productivity or mood? And most importantly, who decides where the line is between healing and enhancement? To be clear, DBS is not inherently dangerous or unethical. For many, it's a life-changing treatment that offers hope where medications have failed. But just like any powerful tool, it comes with risks, especially when its effects reach beyond biology and into the very core of who we are. The takeaway? Technology that touches the brain must be handled with extreme care. When we adjust the circuits of the mind, we're not just changing how people feel. We may be changing who they are, and with great power comes even greater responsibility. 14. Recovered memories. Scandals. Memory is powerful. It shapes who we are, how we see the world, and how we relate to others. But what happens when memories resurface, years, even decades later, that seem too traumatic to forget? In the 1980s and 1990s, a movement in psychotherapy gained traction around the idea of recovered memories. The theory suggested that traumatic events, particularly in childhood, could be buried deep in the subconscious mind, inaccessible for years, until later unlocked through therapy. On the surface, it made sense. Trauma can be overwhelming. Maybe the mind protects itself by blocking painful memories until a person is ready to face them. But soon, something troubling happened. As more therapists began using techniques like guided imagery, hypnosis, and visualization exercises to help patients recover these memories, a wave of accusations followed, often involving claims of childhood abuse that the individuals had no memory of before therapy. Some of these memories may have been real, but others, they were likely false, unintentionally planted during therapy sessions. Studies in cognitive psychology have shown how suggestibility can influence memory. When someone in a position of authority repeatedly suggests an event might have occurred, the brain can begin to construct it, piece by piece, until it feels vivid and real. And here's the problem. The brain doesn't always distinguish between real and imagined memories. Emotionally charged memories, even if false, can feel just as intense as factual ones. Tragically, families were torn apart. Court cases were launched based on memories that couldn't be verified. Innocent people were accused and sometimes convicted of serious crimes based on recollections that may never have actually happened. Eventually, the psychological community took a step back. The memory wars, as they came to be known, led to more careful guidelines in therapy and a better understanding of how fragile and flexible memory really is. So what's the lesson here? Memory is not a hard drive. It's dynamic, emotional, and sometimes unknowingly vulnerable to outside influence. Helping people heal from trauma is essential. But when it comes to memory recovery, gentle support and scientific responsibility must come first. Because even with the best intentions, steering someone's mind too forcefully can lead them down a path that was never truly theirs. 15. Mirror neurons and mind reading. Have you ever watched someone stub their toe and winced as if you felt it too? Or felt secondhand embarrassment just by watching a cringe-worthy moment unfold on screen? That's not just empathy, that's mirror neurons at work. Discovered in the 1990s by researchers studying monkeys, mirror neurons are a special group of brain cells that activate both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else doing the same thing. It's like your brain is mirroring their experience, firing as if you were living it yourself. In humans, mirror neurons are believed to play a major role in empathy, imitation, learning, and social bonding. They're why we smile when others smile, feel sad during emotional movies, and learn new skills just by watching others. Pretty amazing, right? But here's where things get even more interesting and a little unsettling. Because these neurons help us pick up on others' emotions and intentions, some researchers have explored the idea that mirror neurons might be a neurological foundation for mind reading, or at least emotional intuition. In other words, your brain may be wired to sense what someone else is thinking or feeling just by observing their behavior, body language, or facial expressions. This isn't science fiction, it's social neuroscience. But as with many exciting discoveries, mirror neurons have also been overhyped. Some pop science books claim they explain everything from empathy to culture to language acquisition. Others speculate that people with conditions like autism may have broken mirror neurons, a claim that oversimplifies a much more complex issue and can be deeply misleading. And here's where caution is needed, because while understanding empathy and social connection is important, using neuroscience to try and categorize or define people's personalities, behaviors, or emotional depth can quickly become a slippery slope, especially when those conclusions lack solid scientific grounding. So, are mirror neurons real? Absolutely. Do they help us feel connected? Very likely. Can they actually let us read minds? Not quite. But they might be the reason we come so close. The takeaway? Our brains are deeply social. We're wired not just to think, but to feel with others, and mirror neurons may just be the bridge that links our minds together, one shared experience at a time. 16. Brain fingerprinting. Imagine a world where simply thinking about a crime scene could reveal whether you were involved or not. No lie detector, no verbal confession, just your brain waves. Welcome to the world of brain fingerprinting, a controversial and still emerging technique in the intersection of neuroscience and criminal justice. So, what exactly is it? Brain fingerprinting is based on the idea that your brain reacts differently to familiar versus unfamiliar information. When you see something you recognize, like a weapon, a person, or a location, your brain emits a unique electrical response called a 300 wave. It happens automatically, without your control, and can be detected using non-invasive EEG technology. The idea is simple. If a person's brain reacts to key crime-related images or phrases, that might suggest they've seen it before, possibly because they were there. At first glance, it sounds like a lie detector, but smarter. Unlike polygraph tests, which can be influenced by anxiety or stress, brain fingerprinting claims to measure recognition, not emotion. That's a big difference. Some early studies showed promising results, and in a few rare cases, brain fingerprinting has even been introduced as supporting evidence in court, but it's far from universally accepted. Why? Because the science, while fascinating, is still developing, and far from foolproof. Just because a person's brain recognizes something doesn't mean they're guilty. They may have seen the information in news reports, talked to others about the case, or been exposed to similar content in completely innocent ways. And then there's the ethical side. Should we use brain data as evidence in legal proceedings? What about privacy? Could this technology be abused or misunderstood? Even its strongest advocates agree that brain fingerprinting should be used with extreme caution and never as the sole basis for conviction. Still, the concept is captivating and a sign of what's coming. As neuroscience continues to unlock how memory, recognition, and attention work, the temptation to use the brain as a witness will only grow stronger. The takeaway? Brain fingerprinting may not be ready for prime time just yet, but it raises an important question. How much should our thoughts be allowed to testify? Because in the courtroom of the future, your brain might take the stand before you do. 17. Rat brain experiments. When we think about scientific breakthroughs, we often picture high-tech labs, white coats, and microscopes. But sometimes, the most groundbreaking discoveries start with something small, like a rat. In recent years, neuroscientists have made astonishing progress using rats to study how memories are formed, stored, and even transferred. Yes, transferred. In one groundbreaking study, researchers trained a group of rats to navigate a maze. As the rats learned the path, scientists recorded the patterns of activity in their brains, specifically in the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and navigation. Then, using a carefully designed brain-to-brain interface, scientists transferred those memory patterns into the brains of untrained rats. The result? The second group of rats, without prior exposure to the maze, were able to perform significantly better, almost as if they had inherited the experience. Sounds like science fiction, right? It's not. These are real experiments published in peer-reviewed journals, and they've opened the door to some wild possibilities. Researchers are now exploring how this could someday help humans, particularly those who suffer from memory loss, brain injuries, or neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Imagine being able to upload a memory of how to play an instrument or transfer a specific skill directly into the brain. It's the stuff of futuristic movies, but the foundation is already being built. However, as with all powerful technologies, this raises ethical questions. Should we be experimenting with memory transfer? How do we ensure consent if applied to humans? Could this tech be abused for manipulation, coercion, or even rewriting personal identity? Even with rats, scientists are treading carefully, because memory isn't just data, it's deeply tied to identity, emotion, and experience. What we've learned so far is incredible. Memories are physical. They can be measured, mapped, and, potentially, shared. But we've also learned how delicate and complex they are. The takeaway? We are just beginning to scratch the surface of what's possible with the brain. Transferring memories between rats may seem like a small step, but for neuroscience, it could be one of the biggest leaps forward. And if we're not careful, it may also be the moment we realize we're rewriting what it means to be human. 18. Neuroscience in advertising. Have you ever wondered why some ads seem to grab your attention instantly? Or why certain jingles stick in your head for days? It's not a coincidence. It's neuroscience at work, and it's shaping the way companies connect with your brain. This field is called neuromarketing, and it's one of the most fascinating and slightly unsettling uses of neuroscience in the modern world. Instead of relying on focus groups or surveys, advertisers are now using brain scans, eye tracking, and biometric sensors to understand exactly how consumers respond to ads in real time. They measure everything from emotional engagement to subconscious reactions, allowing brands to fine-tune every visual, word, and sound to spark the most powerful response possible. It's not just about whether you like an ad. It's about how your brain responds before you even realize it. For example, researchers can see which parts of your brain light up when you see a product, and whether it triggers a sense of trust, urgency, or desire. They can also analyze attention spans to find the exact moment you lose interest, and adjust their message accordingly. This kind of insight has helped companies craft more persuasive commercials, websites, product packaging, even political messaging. Now let's be clear. Not all of this is negative. Used ethically, neuromarketing can help brands create better experiences, cut down on noise, and genuinely connect with what people care about. It's part of why some advertising today feels so much more in tune with what we want. But here's where things get tricky. Because when marketing taps directly into your emotions and subconscious, it becomes harder to tell whether your choices are truly yours or carefully shaped by a well-researched, brain-tested strategy. Some critics worry that this level of psychological precision could lead to manipulation, especially when used to market unhealthy products to vulnerable audiences like kids or people struggling with impulse control. The bottom line? Your brain is valuable real estate, and advertisers know it. The more you understand how your brain responds to marketing, the more empowered you are to make conscious, informed choices instead of automatic ones. Because in the age of neuroscience-driven ads, awareness isn't just smart, it's your best defense. 19. DARPA mind control research. If you've ever heard of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, you probably know it as the organization behind the internet, stealth technology, and even early versions of GPS. But what many people don't realize is that DARPA has also spent decades exploring the human brain, not just to understand it, but to possibly influence it. Let's be clear, the phrase mind control sounds dramatic, and DARPA isn't building sci-fi style brainwashing machines. What they are doing, however, is investing in technologies that can read, interpret, and potentially modify brain activity, often with military applications in mind. One example is DARPA's Next Generation Non-Surgical Neurotechnology N3 program. The goal? To develop a non-invasive brain-computer interface that would allow soldiers to communicate silently, brain to brain, without speaking a word or lifting a finger. This isn't theory, it's in development. Other DARPA-backed projects have explored controlling drones or robotic limbs, using only thought, boosting alertness through brain stimulation, and even using targeted brainwaves to help treat PTSD, depression, or traumatic brain injuries in veterans. Sounds helpful, and in many cases it is. But the more we learn to influence the brain, the more questions we have to ask. Where's the line between healing and hacking? Between treatment and tactical advantage? For example, if you can enhance a soldier's focus in combat using electrical stimulation, could you also dull fear or suppress moral hesitation? And what happens when this technology leaves the battlefield and enters civilian life? DARPA insists that its research is about protection, performance, and medical recovery, not manipulation. And many of its discoveries have positive, real-world potential, especially in the world of mental health. But here's the big picture. When the most powerful defense agency in the world is investing in brain-modifying tech, we all have a reason to pay attention. The human brain isn't just data. It's memory, identity, and free will. And the deeper we go into influencing those systems, the more carefully we must tread, because in the race to upgrade human capability, we can't afford to downgrade human dignity. 20. Neuralink's ethical minefield. When Elon Musk introduced Neuralink, he wasn't just unveiling a tech startup, he was presenting a vision of the future where the human brain merges with machines. At its core, Neuralink is developing a brain-computer interface, BCI, a tiny device surgically implanted into the skull, designed to read and potentially write information to and from the brain. The early goals sound noble: help people with paralysis control devices, restore lost vision, and eventually treat conditions like depression or memory loss. For those living with neurological disorders, this could be life-changing. So what's the issue? Like any powerful technology, Neuralink raises a long list of ethical questions, especially as its goals stretch beyond medical treatment and into human enhancement. Let's break it down. In theory, Neuralink could someday allow you to upload and download memories, communicate telepathically, or even browse the internet using only your mind. Sounds exciting. But it also opens the door to major concerns. Who owns the data from your brain? Could it be hacked, tracked, sold? What happens if a malfunction or software update affects your personality, your emotions, or your thoughts? Right now, Neuralink is in the early stages. The company has successfully implanted devices in animals and recently received approval for limited human trials. But even at this stage, animal rights activists have raised concerns about testing conditions, and some scientists have criticized the speed at which the project is pushing forward. The larger worry? That we're racing ahead without fully understanding the long-term consequences, both biological and social. BCIs aren't just tools. They have the potential to reshape human experience, including how we think, feel, connect, and express ourselves. Used ethically, this technology could help millions. Used recklessly, it could blur the line between who we are and what we're programmed to be. The takeaway? Neuralink represents the cutting edge of innovation, and also the edge of a new ethical frontier. And as we step into a world where thoughts may one day be shared, stored, or streamed, we need to make sure humanity stays in control of the tech, not the other way around. 21. The free will illusion. Do you feel like you're in control of your choices? What if neuroscience told you you're not? One of the most debated and thought-provoking ideas in modern neuroscience is the concept of free will, and whether it truly exists. For centuries, we've believed that human beings are conscious decision makers, weighing options, making plans, and choosing right from wrong. But a growing body of research suggests that our brains might be making decisions before we're even aware of them. In one famous experiment by neuroscientist Benjamin Libet, participants were asked to move their fingers whenever they felt like it. While they reported consciously deciding to act at a specific moment, brain scans showed that activity in the motor cortex began several hundred milliseconds before they were even aware of making the decision. In other words, the brain made the move, and the mind caught up. Since then, other studies have built on this idea, showing that even complex decisions may have subconscious roots. Our brains gather input, analyze past experiences, factor in emotions, and prepare actions behind the scenes, long before we consciously decide. But before that starts to sound like science fiction, here's the good news. This doesn't mean you're a robot or that your choices don't matter. What it does suggest is that your conscious mind is more like a narrator, interpreting the decisions your brain has already started processing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Understanding how your brain works behind the curtain gives you more power, not less. You can pause, reflect, develop awareness of your patterns and impulses. That ability to reflect is part of free will and maybe the most important part. The debate is far from settled. Some scientists argue that free will still exists, just not in the way we've always imagined. Others believe it's more of a helpful illusion, one that keeps us motivated, responsible, and engaged in society. Either way, it's a powerful reminder. Much of what drives us happens beneath the surface. But with the right mindset and awareness, we can still take the wheel. So the next time you make a choice, ask yourself, was that me or my brain acting first? 22. Thought crime detection. Imagine a world where your thoughts are no longer private, where technology could detect what you're thinking before you ever act on it. It sounds like something straight out of a dystopian novel, and in many ways it is. But it's also becoming scientific reality, thanks to advances in neuroscience and artificial intelligence. This concept is often referred to as thought crime detection, a nickname borrowed from George Orwell's classic 1984, where simply thinking the wrong thing could be punishable by law. Today, researchers and law enforcement agencies around the world are exploring technologies that can analyze brain activity patterns to assess intent. Especially in high-stakes situations, like identifying potential threats or preventing violence. Some early-stage tools use EEG scans to look for neural markers associated with recognition, deception, or stress. Others aim to predict behavior based on microexpressions, subtle physical cues, or rapid eye movement, all tied back to brain processing. One area of active research is identifying individuals who may have violent ideation, not based on actions, but on patterns of thought. To be clear, we're not talking about mind reading, not yet, but we are entering an era where machines can increasingly interpret signs of emotional states, impulses, and even moral conflict, with surprising accuracy. Supporters of this technology believe it could save lives, particularly in scenarios like airport security, mental health crises, or preventing mass violence. If used responsibly, it could act as an early warning system for people who need help or who might be at risk of harming others. But the risks are real. How do we draw the line between a thought and a crime? Can we truly predict behavior from brain patterns alone? And what if someone is flagged based on a moment of anger or fear? Something that never would have led to action. The danger lies in jumping to conclusions without fully understanding the nuance of human thought. Because our minds are full of passing ideas, many of which we would never act on. And in a free society, thinking something isn't a crime. Acting on it is. As we move forward, the balance between public safety and mental privacy will become one of the most important ethical debates in neuroscience. 23. Brain-to-brain communication tests. Imagine sending a thought, not a text, directly to someone else's brain. No typing, no speaking, no screen. Just you thinking and them receiving. This isn't fantasy anymore. Scientists have already begun testing brain-to-brain communication, and while the technology is still in its infancy, the implications are nothing short of revolutionary. In one well-known experiment, researchers connected two human participants using a combination of EEG to read brain signals and TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. The result: one person was able to think about moving their hand, and the other person, without seeing or hearing them, physically moved their hand. In another study, researchers transmitted simple yes/no responses between people across different continents, using only their brain activity. These are early steps, of course. The messages are basic, the signals noisy, and the tech requires bulky equipment. But the idea is real. Our brains can send and receive information directly, bypassing traditional communication altogether. Now, let's talk potential. Brain-to-brain communication could one day allow people with disabilities to communicate without speech. It could help soldiers coordinate silently, or allow surgeons to collaborate instantly during complex operations. In the future, we may be able to sync minds for creative projects, language learning, or emotional understanding. But like all powerful technology, this one raises big questions. What happens to privacy when thoughts can be transmitted, or even intercepted? Could a person's brain be hacked or influenced remotely? And who decides what kind of communication is ethical, safe, or acceptable? So far, these experiments have been strictly controlled and voluntary, with no evidence of malicious use. But the possibilities are growing, and with them, the need for strong ethical frameworks. It's important to remember, communication isn't just about data. It's also about emotion, context, and choice. And in the future, just because a thought can be shared doesn't mean it should be. The takeaway? Brain-to-brain communication could change everything: how we connect, how we learn, even how we love. But like every leap in neuroscience, it demands caution, compassion, and a deep respect for the complexity of the human mind. 24. Parasitic mind control. It might sound like science fiction, but in nature, mind control is real, and some of the most chilling examples don't come from scientists or machines, but from parasites. Let's start with one of the most famous, Toxoplasma gondii, a microscopic parasite that primarily lives in cats. When this parasite infects rodents, something strange happens. The infected rats begin to lose their fear of cats. In fact, they're sometimes even attracted to cat urine. You can imagine how that ends. But what's fascinating and slightly disturbing is how it happens. Toxoplasma doesn't just live in the rat's body. It migrates to the brain and alters neurotransmitter activity, rewiring fear responses and decision-making processes. The result? A behavior change that benefits the parasite, helping it return to its preferred host, the cat. Here's the twist. Toxoplasma can infect humans too. It's estimated that up to 1/3 of the global population carries this parasite, usually with no serious symptoms. But some studies suggest it might have subtle effects on human behavior and personality. Toxoplasma-infected individuals have been linked to higher risk-taking, slower reaction times, and even certain mental health conditions, though the science is still evolving. That's not the only case of nature's mind control. There's a fungus called Ophiocordyceps that infects ants, takes over their nervous system, and causes them to climb to a high point before killing them, allowing the fungus to spread more effectively. Or Leucochloridium, a parasite that turns a snail's eye stalks into pulsating worms, making it more likely to be eaten by birds. These examples raise some big questions. If parasites can manipulate behavior so precisely in animals, what unseen influences might be affecting us? How much of what we do is truly us? And how much is biology acting behind the scenes? To be clear, there's no need to panic. Most of these parasites are harmless to healthy humans. But the concept is important. It reminds us that our minds are deeply connected to our bodies, and even small biological factors can influence how we think, feel, and act. The brain isn't isolated. It's part of a much larger ecosystem, and sometimes the real puppet master isn't what we expect. 25. Subconscious conditioning via media. Every day, we scroll through images, watch videos, hear sound bites, and tap through stories, all within seconds. But while you're casually consuming content, something deeper might be happening behind the scenes. This is the realm of subconscious conditioning, where repeated exposure to certain patterns in media can subtly shape how we think, feel, and behave, without us even realizing it. Now, this isn't about wild conspiracies or brainwashing. It's about a well-documented psychological effect, priming. Priming happens when exposure to certain words, images, or tones affects your behavior later on. For example, people who watch a lot of content filled with fear or conflict may unknowingly begin to feel more anxious or guarded in real life, even if they don't consciously notice the change. The media we consume, especially in high doses, can influence our mood, our attention span, our perceptions of reality, and even our values and beliefs over time. Music with specific rhythms and frequencies can alter brainwave states. Repetitive phrases or visual cues in advertising can reinforce emotional associations with products, people, or ideas. And fast-cut editing styles, popular on social media, are shown to affect dopamine cycles and focus, training our brains to crave constant stimulation. It's subtle, it's everywhere, and it's not necessarily evil. In fact, this kind of conditioning can be used for good. Educational videos, calming content, or uplifting messaging can have the opposite effect, relaxing the mind, promoting empathy, or boosting motivation. But when media is designed primarily for clicks, emotion, and engagement, it tends to favor content that triggers the most visceral reactions: fear, outrage, envy, or urgency. Over time, repeated exposure to these emotional cues can rewire our emotional responses. We become desensitized to violence, overstimulated by drama, or unconsciously drawn toward negativity. The key is awareness. We don't need to fear media, but we do need to use it mindfully. Because what we consume doesn't just inform us, it can transform us. The takeaway: your attention is powerful. So treat it like currency. Choose what you feed your mind, with the same care you choose what you feed your body. Because over time, media doesn't just reflect your world, it can reshape it. 26. AI reading emotions from brainwaves. In a world where artificial intelligence is evolving faster than ever, it's no longer just about machines recognizing your face or understanding your voice. Now, AI is learning to read your emotions directly from your brainwaves. This technology, still in its early stages, is part of a growing field called affective computing. It combines neuroscience, machine learning, and wearable tech to detect your emotional state by analyzing brain signals, heart rate, facial expressions, or even subtle muscle movements. But here's where it gets especially fascinating and a little unsettling. Some companies and research labs are developing non-invasive EEG headsets that can pick up brainwave patterns and send that data to AI systems trained to recognize specific emotions like stress, happiness, boredom, or frustration. And it's not theoretical. It's already being used in places like workplaces to track employee focus and mental fatigue, classrooms where student engagement is monitored in real time, marketing labs to measure how people feel about ads or products, not based on what they say, but on what their brain reveals. It's impressive, even exciting. Imagine technology that knows when you're feeling overwhelmed and adjusts your environment automatically. Or mental health tools that can detect emotional shifts early and offer support before a crisis hits. But there's a flip side. When machines can read emotions from your brain, what happens to your privacy? Who owns that emotional data? And could it be used to manipulate decisions, predict behavior, or even label people unfairly? While most current applications are harmless and voluntary, the potential for misuse is real, especially if emotional data gets into the hands of advertisers, employers, or surveillance systems without clear regulation. The key is consent and transparency. Emotion tracking AI should empower users, not exploit them. And just because we can measure something doesn't mean we should, especially when it comes to the delicate, ever-changing landscape of human emotion. The takeaway? Our feelings are deeply human and deeply personal. As AI gets better at understanding us, we must stay just as good at protecting our boundaries. Because your emotions aren't just data points, they're part of your story. And that deserves respect. 27. The consciousness upload. Race. For centuries, humanity has dreamed of living forever. Now, thanks to rapid advances in neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and digital technology, a new vision of immortality is beginning to take shape, uploading consciousness into machines. This idea, often called mind uploading or digital immortality, suggests that one day we may be able to copy or transfer the contents of the human brain, memories, personality, experiences, into a computer system or virtual reality. Imagine living in a digital world, free from disease, aging, or even the limits of your physical body. You could continue learning, working, connecting, maybe even talking to loved ones after death. As wild as it sounds, this concept is already being explored by scientists, futurists, and tech companies. Projects like the Human Connectome project and initiatives from companies such as Neuralink are laying the groundwork by mapping the brain's structure and function in incredible detail. And while true consciousness uploading is still far from reality, researchers have successfully simulated parts of smaller organisms' brains, like worms, in digital environments. The theory is that eventually a high-resolution scan of the human brain could be used to recreate a digital version of you. But this dream comes with some big questions. Would the digital version really be you? Or just a very convincing copy? What does it mean to preserve consciousness? And who would control that data once your entire identity lives on a server? Ethicists worry that rushing toward this future could come at a cost, like exploiting vulnerable people, creating new forms of inequality, or pushing aside spiritual and emotional dimensions of life and death. There's also the risk that we focus so much on escaping mortality that we forget to make life more meaningful now. Still, the idea of mind uploading continues to inspire and challenge the way we define identity, memory, and what it means to be human. The takeaway? Whether or not we ever upload our minds, one thing is certain. We're entering an age where technology is brushing up against the soul. And the biggest questions we'll face won't be scientific. They'll be philosophical, about who we are, who we become, and what we leave behind.